Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at Casablanca Chess, which is an event being held here in Casablanca, Morocco. Now, this event is quite different from other events for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's a major event being held on the African continent. This is not something that happens all that frequently. Additionally, we're playing a variant. So, what does that mean? The variant in question is called Casablanca Chess, where the players start with a position from the middle game. So this means that the first 10 or so moves are already predetermined, and the games are taken from historical games from years past. So without further ado, let's jump right into the action. Now, this is a 4-player event. It features myself, Magnus Carlsen, the 5-time world champion, Vishy and Anand, another legend of the game, a 5-time world champion, and Amin Bassem, who represents Africa. So, first game of the day, I'm playing with the white pieces against Amin Bassem, and the game starts out with a predetermined set of moves, which I will show you guys at the start. So the game starts with e4. We get e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, and the classic Evans Gambit with b4. Bishop takes b4, c3, bishop a5, castles, and now we get queen to f6, d4, knight g7, bishop g5, queen d6, queen b3, castles, and this is where the game starts in earnest with the players on their own. Now, of course, none of the 4 players knew what this game was before the round finished, but it is in fact a position which occurred in a game played in 1889 between Chigorin and Steinitz. So it's a game that happened many, many years ago. So, to give you guys perspective, we play the moves. We have about 2 minutes before the game starts, and we play rapid chess with 15 minutes plus 10 seconds. So, the game starts anew, and I decide to play this, rook d1, bishop b6 is where the game starts. Sorry, this was the last set of moves, and now we're on our own. So here, I played this move, bishop to f1, which, as you guys can see, is simply a mistake. It is a blunder. This is not the best move in the position. Now, in the other game between Magnus and Vishy and Anand, Magnus opened with his move knight to a3, and this is also a blunder as well. So, online, I noticed that Fabiano Caruana, currently ranked number 2 in the world, mentioned that the player Chigorin, who was playing this game with the white pieces in 1889, played the top computer line with d takes e5, and the game continued with the move queen g6. Now, the computer gives white a very, very marginal edge. I actually think that this is a position which is easier for black to play. Now, before we get too deep into the weeds, I do want to add one thing. For people who are a little bit lower rated, I'm going to apologize in advance because there are a couple of things that I'm going to talk about in this video which are simply not applicable at any level except the absolute top. So when I talk about this position, and I say that it's easier for black to play. The reason it's easier for black to play is that black has ideas like knight to a5, d6 opening up the long diagonal for the light square bishop, and white simply doesn't have a clear-cut path to finishing his development. If you play a move like knight bd2, which is top move, after knight h5, let's say queen to a4, knight takes c4, takes, and knight c6 here, followed by the move d6 opening up the diagonal, black is simply a little bit better. So keep all this in mind because this is one thing that's really, really important. So, when I play this move bishop to f1, both Magnus and I were of the opinion that this position looks easier to play for white in a rapid game. In a classical game, I actually would probably rather be black because you can spend a lot of time here trying to come up with the optimal sequence of moves. So, Amin plays the move pawn takes pawn, I take, and now he plays the move knight g6, which is simply a mistake. Computer thinks that after queen to g6 here with the idea of d5 or d6, black is simply better here. But again, at a human level, it's very hard to figure out because you only have 15 minutes for the entire game, and if you're wrong, you're simply going to lose the game. Let's say white goes d5 here, and black doesn't realize that knight d4 takes is actually winning for black. You could simply avoid going into this. Now, if you can spend 10 or 15 minutes or 20 minutes even calculating these long lines with queen g6, d5, and knight d4, there's a very good chance that if this were a classical game, black would play these moves, like my opponent Bassem. But with limited time on the clock, it's very hard to figure out what the best approach is, and he plays this move knight g6 instead. Now I go knight c3, and black has one big issue here, which is that he's struggling to develop this light square b. So Bassem plays knight takes pawn, and this is simply a blunder because now I can sack the rook. With rook takes knight, he takes, and I go for this move knight b5, forking both the bishop on d4 and the queen on e6. Now, if black plays a move like queen to e6, let's just say I take here, and black goes queen takes pawn, I have this move rook to e1. Black has no squares available on the diagonal, and after queen g4, h3, queen h5, and g4, the queen is simply trapped on the edge of the board, and white is simply winning. So, Bassem plays bishop takes rook. I take the queen, he takes back, and now black has 2 rooks and 2 pawns in return for the queen, but black still has one big problem with this, which is this light square b, which cannot be developed very easily. On the other hand, with the white piece here, I know that I have to go all in, because if black can get, let's just say, a move like b6, and then something like, let's just set this up with bishop b7, black is simply much better, if not, in fact, winning. So what do? I play this move h4, trying to kick this knight from the g6 square. Bassem now plays d5, and here I go queen d1. Now, the computer actually thinks that after take, d6 and queen takes d6, white is better, or maybe it's queen d1. But simply put, at this point in the game, I simply felt that if I let black ever finish this development and bring the bishop and the rooks into the game here, I simply don't have a clear-cut plan, and I think that I could lose the game. So instead, I play this move queen d1, we get bishop b2, I go back, bishop a1, and now I play an important move, queen to b1. Now, the reason this move is important is initially when I play queen d1, if black goes bishop c3 and I get queen c1, this is the position that I had in my mind as what I wanted. So that's why here, after bishop b2, I force the bishop back to a1, and now via transposition, I get the queen to c1 since the b2 square was not available. Here, Bassem now plays move d4, and after this move, the game is effectively lost. What Bassem should have tried was perhaps taking the pawn, because now after I take this bishop, takes h5, and this move f6, black is apparently in the game here. He's not completely lost, and the show goes on. But by this point, Bassem is already quite low on time. He's down to 2 minutes and 50 seconds. It's a very tough position to play, and he blunders with the move d4. I go h5 to kick the knight away from g6. No squares available in the center of the board, so Bassem goes knight h8. Now I play this move e5, Bassem goes rook to e8, and now I play a really nasty move, which is bishop to f6, sacking the bishop. But what I am going here for, speaking of the classics, is the very famous Jean-Baptiste Lally checkmate here, where after takes, let's say d6 and queen to h6, I'm simply mating with the queen and the pawn, and the king has no way to dodge the mate. So I go bishop f6 here with this idea of queen g5, and now Bassem plays h6, trying to stop me from jumping to the square with the queen and going for mate. Here I now go queen to f4, and Bassem plays bishop b4. Again, if you were to take on f6, I can simply take here, and this idea of queen to h6, queen g7, or queen g3 threatening mate on g7 is simply overwhelming. So Bassem goes bishop b4, and now I play the move bishop to d3, and he plays d5 here, desperately trying to bring this bishop and the rook into the game. If Bassem were to take the bishop, I can simply take the pawn here. Black goes bishop f8, for example. I have bishop to h7, checkmating the king. And if he goes knight g6, I simply take. And with the bishop and the queen coming to the party and the lack of development of this bishop and the rook, the game is over. So Bassem plays d5. Now I sack the bishop, and he plays the move king takes bishop. I check. And here, Amin Bassem resigns the game. Now, the reason he resigns is quite straightforward. If black were to play the move king to f8 here, I can take, king e7, play the move queen to f6 check. And in this position, if black goes king d7, there's bishop b5, winning the rook on e8. And if black goes king back to f8 here, I can simply play the move bishop g6. And after bishop e6 and knight takes d4, I'm going to remove this bishop, which guards the pawn, and checkmate on h7. Or if rook e7, I checkmate on h8. Sample line, king g8, takes, king h8, and queen h7 mate. So I win this game. Seemingly a very effortless game. Now, I will be honest, I got a little bit lucky here from the standpoint that I had the white piece in this game. I really do believe that if I were on the other side of this with the black pieces, there's a very good chance that I would have lost this game. But it was a position that I think simply in a rapid game was very, very favorable to white. So I got a win in the first round of the Casablanca Chess out of this Evans Gambit. Magnus also won against Vishy with the white pieces, and I think that sort of speaks to one of the core themes of my recap today, which is that in rapid chess and blitz chess, it's the positions that are easier to play really makes a huge difference versus classical chess, where generally speaking, the actual objective evaluation, having time to think and find the absolute best move, is much more important. So I get a win in the first game. Now in the second game, the player selected the position. Unfortunately, it was a position that was very, very dry and boring. So I'm not going to go over my game against Vishy, as both my game against Vishy and Magnus' game against me and Bassem were relatively boring and straightforward draws. So let's jump to the critical game now. So the third round, after having played Vishy and Amin, I am now playing against Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces and in the third and final round of the day. So once again, since it's Casablanca Chess, obviously the moves are not chosen by us, so we'll get to the critical position. So the game starts with e4, c5, knight f3, e6, d4 takes, knight c6, knight c3, and now let's move d6. Here we have g4, and this move h6 is played. Now keep in mind, there are a couple important things here. Obviously, I'm doing this recap on the fly, so I don't have a lot of time to go and do research. But recently, in one of the Chess Champions Tour events, whether it was this position or whether it was actually out of a Paulsen, there was a game where Fabiano Caruana tried to go for this early G4, H4, G5 against Magnus Carlsen himself in one of the online tournaments. Someone who's going to watch this video can probably tell me which game it was. But Magnus actually just completely destroyed Fabiano when Fabiano tried to push the pawns on the king side. So back to the game at hand. We get this position with G4, H6, H4, A6, Bishop G2, Bishop E7, Bishop E3, takes, E5, Queen D1, and now after Bishop to E6, the game starts anew. Now this, of course, was a game that was played between Karpov and Kasparov. I believe in the second World Championship match. I don't have the year on me right off, but at any rate, it was a game between Karpov and Kasparov. Now, I vaguely recalled this, maybe recall is the wrong word, but I vaguely knew that this came out of one of their matches, because there were a lot of games I used to look at in the old days, both in the Sicilian, but also in the Queen's Gambit Decline, where there were a bunch of pawn pushes on the edge for white. Now, as I said, a couple of things are very important here. First things first, I knew that Magnus had won in this sort of position against Fabiano a few months back, or maybe it's a year back, so I already didn't feel comfortable. But on top of that, I have to say, and this is a little bit, it's not really a secret per se, but in the past when I've looked at these early lines with G4 and H4 against all the Paulsens, I've never really liked the position for white, and it's one of the biggest reasons I don't play this. So already from the get-go, I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable because I don't like these positions from the white side. I try to avoid them if I can, but I'm in one of these situations. And to make matters worse, of course, I'm playing against Magnus Carlsen, who pretty much loves every position that you can get. So in this position, I play the move knight d5, Magnus goes rook c8, and now I play the move c3. Keep in mind, if black tries to gobble on h4, there's bishop b6 hitting the queen. After the queen moves, there's knight c7, forking the king and the rook, and simply winning the game. So Magnus goes rook c8, I play c3, and here he plays this move knight f6. Now, in the other game between Vishy and Amin, bishop takes h4 was played, and that game actually ended in a pretty quick draw after bishop b6, queen g5, and bishop e3, queen d8 with a very straightforward repetition. Now, I was very happy actually to see Magnus play knight f6, because since this is an exhibition in a sense, it's not rated, and mostly I would say it's for fun. There's not like a massive prize one. We're trying to show the game, shows variant off to the spectators. I was really happy this move didn't happen, because in my mind, I felt like it'd be very wrong and awkward to simply force a draw here. And I probably would have done something crazy or had to do something crazy rather than force a draw. So I was very happy when Magnus played knight f6, because it's alleviated one of my big concerns, where if you end up in a situation where the game ends really quickly, you feel like you've let the spectators down, since of course this is a competition. I don't want to say it's for fun, but it's something where there are no ratings on the line, and mostly it's just to show off the game of chess or to show off the variant itself. So I was very, very relieved when Magnus played knight f6 and he didn't take on h4, because I wasn't sure how I would find a way to keep the game going and not make a repetition. So here I take the bishop on e7, and this is probably the start of going in a wrong direction, as the computer prefers this move g5. So I take on e7, Magnus takes with the king, playing Le Bon Cloud. Now, actually, I was not surprised by this move at all, as there are quite a few variations within multiple Sicilians where black has a pawn on h6, and you get this structure with a6, d6, and e5, and a bishop and a knight on these two squares. Black can capture with the king on e7. So I wasn't very surprised by this move, and I actually already was starting to feel like I would have to be very, very precise, not to be worse. So I go g5, Magnus plays knight g4, I go bishop c1, and now he plays this move pawn takes pawn. Now this move sort of took me a little bit by surprise, as I was expecting him to go queen b6, threatening to mate me on the f2 square. And after queen e2, I thought then he might take, because here if I take on g5, now he can trade the rooks on h1 and go rook to h8 here, infiltrating on the open h file. So Magnus instead takes, and this is where I spent way too little time. Now, one of the things that's very, very important in Rapid and Blitz, to a lesser extent, much more Rapid than Blitz, I would say, because in Blitz you generally don't have that long, is using your time correctly. Now, one of the things that I've struggled with in Rapid Chess for a long time now, I'd say probably even before the World Cup, which I played in last August in Baku, Azerbaijan, is using my time correctly. Now, this is a position where probably the way I should have used my time was played bishop c1 immediately, instead of using 3 minutes, and now after takes, then using 2 or 3 minutes to find the best move instead of the other way around, because now when I use a bunch of time here and the plan that I play here is wrong, I end up in a lot of trouble. Computer says here that after f3, kicking the knight, knight f6, and bishop takes g5, white is apparently a little bit better here. Now, to be honest, I was not really convinced because I thought after queen b6, I have a very, very weak queen side here. Apparently, after queen d2 and king f8, I can just castle to the queen side. And after rook c6, I guess king b1 and white maybe is better. Although, honestly, after queen a5 here, threatening mate on the queen side, let's just say I go a3 and knight h5 with knight f4 or even bishop b3. Honestly, I just don't like this position. Now, of course, the computer says that white is better here with perfect play, but this highlights a big difference between rapid and classical chess. I do think that if I had 20 minutes to think here, I would have come with a better solution. Not to say I would have played f3 or this whole line with f3 and bishop g5, but I do think I would have come up with a better solution nonetheless. So I play this move bishop f3, and this is simply a bad move because now after queen to d7, I play the move rook g1, and Magnus finds an all-star move here, which is this move knight to h2. If black goes knight f6 here, I can once again take with the bishop on g5. And the one difference here between the line we just saw is that in this position, I have the bishop on f3. If we go back to this position right here, for example, right here with knight h5, you'll notice I have the pawn on f3, so this f4 square is very juicy, and the bishop is very passive. But if I can get this version with the bishop on f3 here, after knight f6 takes and king f8, for example, now I can simply play something like queen d2, maybe h5 as well, and black's knight is simply not going to h5 because I have a bishop on f3 instead of a pawn. But Magnus, to his credit, finds the best move here. He plays knight to h2, and now I play this move bishop g5. Now, the computer wants this crazy move bishop to e2 here, because if black takes what looks like a second free pawn, now I have rook g2, and the knight on h2 is simply trapped here. It is no squares available, and white will end up a piece. Now, again, if I had not spent my time the way that I did, perhaps I could have maybe found this if I had 5 more minutes, 3 more minutes, whatever it is. But I've already spent a lot of time on bishop c1. And at this point, I'm trying to move quickly, trying to get back in the game on the clock. And I don't find this move. I played bishop g5. Now, in all fairness, I don't think bishop e2 is a move that anybody is going to consider, except in a classical game of chess. So I take the pawn. Magnus goes f6. I play bishop e3. He plays rook g8 here, guarding against the pawn being captured on g7. And now I play h5. Magnus trades here, and now he finds a phenomenal move, which is this move, queen to b5. Now, you're probably thinking, well, the computer doesn't say this is the best move, there's probably something better, but queen b5 really, I would say, in effect, is the start of the end of the game. Now, the reason I say that is for a couple of different reasons. The big issue for white here are these queenside pawns. These pawns are very loose. I'd love to castle here and finish my development, but then I lose this pawn on a2. If I play the move b3 here, black can now play this very nasty move queen d3, pinning the bishop on e3 and hitting the pawns on c3 and e4. In this position, if I go rook c1, black has many ways to be better, but probably simplest is this move bishop to f7. Although apparently here, because computers are so ridiculous, there's this move rook to g5, which guards the pawn. During the game, the only line I saw was rook to h1, and now I think I thought rook h7, let's say rook h4, rook h8, trying to win the pawn, and if I go h6 here, after rook takes pawn, the bishop is still pinned, and after takes, black is simply winning here with ideas like bishop h5 or rook h1 down the road. So, unfortunately here, I have to play this move bishop c1, but now Magnus goes bishop f7, tickling the pawn on h5. I play rook h1, and he plays another great positional move, queen to a4. Now, these moves might look silly, but what queen a4 really does is it paralyzes white's queen side. I cannot go b3 because black simply takes, and I lose a pawn, and I lose the game. I also can't go c4 here. And on top of not being able to push the pawns here, I have to deal with the weakness on a2, the weakness on e4, and the weakness on h5 at the same time as well. So I have 3 weaknesses here, and according to general principles in chess, if you have more than one weakness, you're probably losing the game. So I have 3 weaknesses, I can't castle my king, and the game is simply over effectively. So I play the move queen to e2 here, Magnus goes d5 here, and now I trade the pawns. Computer thinks that I guess I can go for some c4 here, but again, after takes, I'm down a pawn, the h5 pawn is weak, and against a player like Magnus, just 0 chance of surviving. So I decide to trade the pawns, and now I go rook to h2. Magnus plays the move queen c6, which is the absolute best move here, as black is trying to go bishop to f3 and create the classic wooden shield. Here I play f4. This move is somewhat desperation here, but you'll notice at this point, it's kind of ironic that it's similar to the first game of the day where my opponent was unable to develop his bishop and the rook, but now I am unable to develop my bishop and rook. So I go f4 here, trying to take advantage of the king being in the center and desperately trying to open some diagonals for my dark square b. Magnus goes bishop f3, I play queen e3, and now he decides to take on h5. I trade, I take on e5, and again, Magnus, true to form, finds the only move that wins immediately, which is this move rook to e8. Of course, black can also go queen h1, king f2 check, king f1, and there probably are a plethora of ways for black to be winning, but the game does not end immediately. But when Magnus plays rook to e8 here, the game is just over, as I cannot get my king out of the center of the board. It's also somewhat reminiscent of the game that I lost to Vita in the candidates about a month and a half ago. So here I play queen g1. If I take on f6, black can simply take with the king, the pin plays, and white loses the game. So I play the move queen g1 here. If I go king f2, which is another line, black can simply go king f7 with the idea of taking the pawn on e5. And my king over here simply has no protection. There are no pawns, nothing around the king, just a lone queen. And especially with the opposite color bishops here, black is simply winning the game. So I play queen g1 with little time on the clock. Magnus goes king f7, and now I play the move bishop e3, trying to bring the king and bring the rook to center of the board. Now, if I could get a position like this, for example, it would still be losing, but at least the show goes on as I finish my development by bringing the bishop to the center and the rook to the e1 square at the same time. But alas, I am simply way too slow. Now, if I were to go bishop f4, which is another line, there's queen e4 check, queen e3. Now, queen h1 does win the rook here, but even rook takes pawn on e5 ends the game. So if I trade the queens, I lose the bishop. And if I go king f2, there's queen c2 check, threatening to win the queen. I block, and then rook e2, creating the classic kebab on the 7th rank. So I go bishop e3, Magnus takes, I play king d2, he plays queen d5, and now I go king c1. At this point, it's all over. Even if I block with the bishop, there's rook e2, king c1, queen e4, let's say I go queen d1. And now, I guess rook c2 is the flashing mate, but even bishop g6, setting up these massive threats on the diagonal, simply wins on the spot as well. So I go king c1, and Magnus sacks the rook, with rook takes bishop, and here I resign the game, because if I take the rook, there's queen to d1, which is simply checkmate. And if I don't take, I guess I can go king c2, there's still rook e2, king c1, check, and it will be mate in a couple of moves as well. So I resign the game. That means Magnus is the clear leader right now after 3 rounds with a score of 2.5 points out of 3. I'm actually in second place with 1.5 out of 3, and sharing third and fourth are Amin, Bassem, and Vishy, Anand, who have a half point less than me with 1 point out of 3 each, 2 draws and 1 loss. So a little bit disappointing final game of the day. Certainly not what I was hoping for. Magnus found some tremendous moves in the middle game, finding this knight h2 move, finding queen b5 and queen a4. All 3 of those moves were incredibly strong moves. I really cannot overstate how good they were in practical terms of making the position impossible for white to play. So a little bit disappointing. Now I will say on the bright side, one of the bright sides about some of these positions that I'm getting in terms of trying to use this towards like classical chess or regular chess in general is that this does show that my instincts are actually very good at times about positions that I like or don't like. Because as I mentioned earlier at the start, I have looked at some of these lines with these g4 and h4 pawn pushes earlier, and I've never liked them. I didn't try. I was forced to play it today, and I simply reacted poorly. My opponent was simply much better than I was, and it's a sign that at least my intuition about some of the positions that you try to go towards or steer away from is actually quite good, because I think that if I play this consistently, this g4, h4, whether it's the position we had to take today or in general, there's a very good chance I'm going to lose a lot of games. So it's something I definitely try to steer very clear of. That being said, of course, credit goes to Magnus. He simply played the middle game better than I did, and he is the current leader with 2.5 points out of 3. So on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap from the first day of the Casablanca variant exhibition being held here in Casablanca, Morocco. We do have one more day with 3 games tomorrow. It's a very short 2-day event, but I will obviously be doing a recap after the games tomorrow. So hope you guys enjoy it. I got to go pretty quickly because I have a gala dinner to get to. I'm already running a little bit late, so I do apologize for that. But if you've not already subscribed to my channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we will be back tomorrow with another recap from Casablanca, Morocco. See you guys. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.